welcome to another Checiegirl Creations video. So today I will be sharing with you how I make tags that go into packages when I'm sending off shop orders. I like to send a tag to say thank you. So this is quite a long video, you can see. It'll be quite sped up as well because there's like 6 hours of footage that went into this. So if it's a little bit too fast for you, you can click like the cog at the bottom of your screen and slow it down a little bit and adjust the speed in some areas, but I'm hoping it's not too fast. I didn't want to try to keep everything in, but if you would like to see a more in-depth video of this, you can become a Patreon from $3 a month, and this will be in real time with real-time commentary, and I'll walk you through the steps in even more detail over on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, the links are down below, and it'll also be in an iCard in the top right hand corner, as well as all my other like social media links. So to like start off the background, I'll be using cardstock from like cereal boxes. I basically peel off like the first layer of like branding packaging, and then you have a pretty nice cardstock. I like to use the ones that are white so that I start off with a much more brighter background instead of like the brown ones. As well, this the brand I use, it peels off quite nicely. So I did have to prime one of them though because the packaging didn't come off very well, and I probably should have primed all of them because they have a bit of a fluffy texture once you peel off that like branding packaging bit, and it made the jelly printing a little bit more difficult just because the fluff was kind of sticking to the plate and sometimes the paint would kind of peel off. But once everything dried, it was fine because I don't tend to wait between prints for the paint to dry. So that's probably, if I had waited for it to dry, I wouldn't have had that issue, but I'm very impatient when it comes to jelly printing, so I just keep on printing until I'm happy with it. And I'll be using acrylics. I'll be using some really cheap ones in tubs from like a paint by numbers set that I don't like to paint with. That was really good for jelly printing. I like to use my cheaper paints when I'm jelly printing to just kind of use them up, as well as some other paints, and everything will be listed down below. I'll also be using some like silicone mark making tools to make marks on the jelly print. I don't really like to jelly print with stencils. I prefer to use a mark making tool then stencil over if I'm making like a quite a kind of busy looking detailed background. I'll add some stenciling, which we will be doing. And yeah, I'll also be using a brayer to spread the paint. So I use a couple techniques when I was jelly printing. I kind of mix colors, so I put like a couple colors on the plate and then brayer them all together so you get a mix of colors. And sometimes I would print it without adding any marks, but once I like put the first layers of paint, then I would add marks, because when you add marks, like you scrape away the paint from the plate, then you can see the layers underneath. And make sure whatever you're using to make marks on your jelly print aren't sharp, because your jelly plate you can ding it or you can cut it. So that's why I like to use silicone on my jelly plate, because then I won't damage my plate. You also want to make sure to like not leave anything stuck in it because it could be damaged. And yeah, so I'll just keep on like, you can make all sorts of different patterns. You'll see throughout the different patterns I make with the mark making tools, and there's a whole bunch of different sides, so you can make like different size marks. And then I also did a couple gradients. Sometimes I would do like a very blended gradient, so like you can't really see where like one paint color ends and the other starts. Or sometimes I would do a sharper gradient where you can see very clearly that there's two colors next to each other. It's just slightly blended in the middle. So I did that, and you'll see I use a whole bunch of different colors. Like on one of them, like the big piece, I did very warm colors like yellows, pinks, reds, oranges. On the other one I did more blues, greens, purples, and then I would do like a contrasting color just to kind of add some interest. And the thinner ones, I just use the thinner ones to just kind of pick up any excess paint. And also what I like to do is I do clean my plate afterwards, but just before I clean my plate, I'll just put a layer of white, quite a thick layer of white, braid it over. Then I'll grab like a scrap piece of paper and just press like really hard, like really burnish on the paper, and then just lift off any excess paint. Then I can go over with some water and like a paper towel or a cloth and wipe it down. And I do like to have a scrap piece of paper that I can either brayer off on, though I was brayering off onto the cardboard, mostly because it's just a background and I wanted to add lots of layers. The more layers you add with your jelly printing, the better it'll look. So you unless you're doing something where you only need to print once. I tend to print more than once, and it did take me a little while to get the amount of like paint I was using right, because it all depends on like the size of the plate. But once I'd like done the first set of printing, I got a bit more used to like how much paint I had to put on, because I haven't jelly printed in ages. And yeah, but just make sure not to put too much paint on. So basically when you're brayering, if you're hearing a kind of sticky sound, that means you've got enough paint on there. But if the brayer is kind of slipping and sliding, that means you have too much paint. And when I have too much paint, I just press very lightly with whatever I'm printing on. I'll lift it up and then I'll print again, and I'll just get a couple ghost prints, which is when you print, when you get more than one print from like one set of paint, that's a ghost print. Yeah, so just lots of layers until I was happy with it. And once I was happy with everything, I painted the backgrounds. I mean, I left them to dry for a little bit, and then I painted the back of the cardstock just again with the same acrylic. I grabbed a flat paintbrush, kind of watered down the paint, and just kind of abstractly, randomly just slapped the paint on there, because I want the back of the tag to look pretty. And it's better if I just paint it over instead of trying to leave it blank and white, because that's just never going to happen when I'm jelly printing. So yeah, I just paint over randomly. I use the same kind of colors I use, like say on the front of the cardstock. I just paint randomly, and sometimes like the cardstock does feel a little bit, it can feel a little bit weak and thin, but I mean it's pretty strong. But by the time I add all those layers of paint, it actually feels a lot stronger than it did before. So yeah, just test. If it feels pretty strong before you're printing, you're going to be able to like use that. Yeah, so once I had painted all the backgrounds and everything and added all that color, I was actually able to use up quite a bit of my cheap paints. I don't know if I mentioned, but I do have some cheap paints that I don't like at all. They're not very good quality, so I think my next printing project, I will use those paints as well. This is a great way to use up your paints. But yeah, so once I finished painting all the backgrounds and everything dried, I was ready to add stenciling. Now, I didn't really wait for everything to be perfectly dry. I just waited until it was touch dry to go in for like the other steps, mostly because since it's jelly printing, it's very thin layers of paint, and when it's stenciling, when you're stenciling with like a makeup sponge, it's very thin layers, so it dries pretty quickly, and especially since it's acrylic, it dries really nicely. So I went in with a bunch of different stencils. Some of the stencils I made myself, some are like from packaging and stuff, kind of like junk that I use for stenciling, and some are from Shawn Petit stencils. I used to be on her creative team. I'll actually link the my creative team playlist in an iCard in the top right hand corner, so you can check those videos out if you want to. So I have a bunch of her stencils. Her stencils are really nice. I really like using them. So I use her stencils as well, and I also use a few like mark making tools, and again it's basically like junk. So I use like empty paint rolls, bottle caps, random things to just stamp into the paint and just stamp onto the backgrounds. So when I'm adding the stenciling, because I know this is going to be cut into small, very small tags, I go kind of a little bit over the top with it. I don't want to go too crazy because I will be adding focal images, but normally if I'm making a background that's going to stay big, I just place things in like 3 places, so you have like that visual triangle. But when it's going to be cut down small, I tend to put it all over the place so that you get little bits of pattern on all the like the tags. So not all the tags will look the same, of course, but you'll still get quite a bit of pattern in a few tags. And I like to both use coordinating colors. So say on the warm one, I'll use yellows and pinks and stuff, but I'll also like throw in a couple like contrasting colors like blue or green or something. And I like to use, like when I'm doing the stenciling, I like to use stencils that kind of work with each other. And yeah, and again, I'm using my makeup sponges, just very cheap. I think they're from Poundland most likely. And because I don't really wash mine, so when it dries, I just cut off like the hard bit, and then I just use the rest of the sponge, so I don't have to like waste any good sponge. So I only really throw away my makeup sponges once like the whole thing has been used. And again, when you're like stenciling, you don't want your the paint to kind of scooch underneath the stencil, so you can just, you have your like your glob of paint, so you can pick some paint up, you can kind of like stamp it off on your paint palette and then go in stenciling, so it's nice thin layers. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I do. I think I only really use stencils. I might have used some masks. I think I had at least a set of masks from Sean Petite. And everything I'm stenciling is quite abstract, whether it be letters or shapes, anything like that, because since I'll be using focal images, I don't want to distract from anything. So I'm using quite abstract, and I also want some of them to blend in a little bit too. Yeah, so I would do the stenciling first, then I do the mark making, like stamping, just because the stamping is a little bit thicker. And once I did that, I left everything to dry a little bit, nice and dry, so that I can start cutting. So before I talk about that, I just wanted to say that the backgrounds you make, because sometimes when you're jelly printing, you can make a lot of prints. Because I was doing this for a purpose, I didn't go overboard, but a lot of the time, if I'm just jelly printing for fun, I go really overboard. And you can use your jelly prints for anything, like card bases, bookmarks, tags, depending on what you've like printed on. If it's just paper, I tend to use that in junk journals. I use some jelly printed pages in my junk journals that I made, the fairy themed ones. I'll link to the flip through if you guys want to check that out, and I can also link to them where they're available on my shop, or in my shop should I say. You can use them, you can like make pretty much your own pattern paper. So if you're say doing scrapbooking or card making or something, and you want to make your own backgrounds for that card, you can totally do that. I actually prefer making my own backgrounds and using pre-made like deco paper, because I can pick my own colors and pick my own embellishments, and everything can actually go together better. So if you find that like you don't really have that much papers, but you have a jelly print, you can make your own backgrounds, or you can use stencils to do that too, or like you can even make your own backgrounds with a paintbrush. There's so many ways to make backgrounds. And yeah, you can make your own pattern paper, so it's really fun to kind of like make your own backgrounds. It just has a really nice look to it, especially when you make it yourself. It feels a little bit more special. So what I'll be using for cutting, when I make a background, especially when it's like really pretty, because I really liked a lot of the backgrounds I made, you don't want to waste it too much. So when it goes to cutting out like the tags, I am using a die. You'll see in a little bit on the screen. It's by Art C. I got that from Michael's quite a few years ago. Let's see, probably 4 years ago I think. So I used that. I used to like hand cut my tags just by like cutting one tag and then cutting it with like my guillotine, but now that I have the die, it just makes mass producing so much easier. It just gets the job done a lot faster. So I prefer having the die, but you don't need a die if you don't have one. I use the smallest one from the set, and that one doesn't actually have like a hole punch bit, so I do go in afterwards with like a single hole punch and just punch all the holes. I just eyeball it. You can draw it out if you want to, but I ended up making 60 tags, so drawing each one out would have been extremely tedious, so I just eyeball it and do my best to get it centered. So what I do is, like, the die is around 4.5 centimeters, like just under wide. So I'll like test to see how much tags, or like how efficiently I can use this background I've just made, so I don't have too much waste and leftover. And so I cut the background into 5 centimeter strips, and then I can run them through my die cutting machine. My die cutting machine is the Sizzix Big Shot. I'm not too sure which one. I've had that for quite a few years, so I'm pretty sure that's not even available anymore. They probably have a newer version now, but it works perfectly fine. And I cut one tag at a time because the cardboard's quite thick, so I can't really cut 2 at a time. So I cut 1 at a time. And when you're mass producing like I am, I would recommend to do each step all at the same time. So I do all the jelly printing at the same time, all the painting of the backgrounds at the same time, stenciling at the same time, then I cut everything at the same time. So I'll cut everything into 5cm strips, and then I can do all the die cutting, and then I can do all the focal images, all like the doodling, which you'll see in a little bit. And yeah, it's like a conveyor belt, so it doesn't feel as tedious when you do it like a conveyor belt. If you do like cut a strip and then die cut that strip, then cut a strip, then die cut that strip, it'll go a lot slower. So yeah, I cut everything into 5cm strips, and then I die cutted everything. And once I did that, I punched holes with the single hole punch. My single hole punch doesn't have a brand. I think it's just your basic single hole punch, nothing fancy. And I did make sure that my backgrounds were nice and dry before I put the dye through them, because I didn't want to like get any paint on my dyes. And once I did that, now I can add the focal images. So again, I'm using Sean Petit's stencils. There's quite a few. All the names will be listed down below, like birds, flowers, dragonflies, butterflies, all those sorts of things. I also had some words as well, because I like pairing some of the focal images with like words, like a bird and the word fly and that kind of thing. I think it's quite cute. And I'll also be using some foam stamps. Some of the foam stamps I've made myself. Any of the foam stamps that you see backed onto like cardstock, that was made by myself by just die cutting shapes out of foam or cutting shapes out of foam. And then I just layer 2 layers of foam so it's nice and thick, and I can get a nice stamped image from that. I actually did that to make my own wrapping paper a couple years back. And some of the foam stamps I have were bought as well, but many years ago. I've had them for like ever. Yeah, so oh, and also some Sean Petit masks as well. I used some of those too. So I kind of had 4 tag designs. Some I masked, and a mask is when you have like, okay, so a stencil is the cutout image. So when you stencil something, you get like a whole image, but then when you mask something, the paint goes around the mask, so it's like a kind of inverted image. I hope I'm explaining that okay. So the masks, because some of Sean Petit's stencils, like the butterflies and the dragons and the birds, all have masks because from the image that was cut out of the stencil. So I had mask tags. I liked using the masks when like I really liked the background, but I still wanted to add something to it. So when I was masking, I wasn't really covering that much up, so you were still getting quite a bit of the background. Then I had stenciling, where it was just a stenciled image. Then I also had stenciling with a word, like a sentiment. And the last design was some of the backgrounds I loved so much I didn't want to cover it up with anything. So I just went around like the edges with my finger and some black paint. And I just highlighted the edges of the tag with some black paint, as well as like the punch hole. I actually do that to all the tags. I just did that to all the tags after I did like the stenciling and stuff. And on the backgrounds that I didn't add anything on, I just kind of like rubbed a little bit of black paint over just to ground it a little bit. And you'll see once I edge all the tags with black, it looks a lot more finished. It looks a lot more grounded. Now, the reason I used black to add the images was because I wanted it to be very, I wanted it to pop like a lot. And I could have used like other colors, like contrasting colors, but I really wanted more of a, I can't think of the word, like, is it pop art I'm thinking of? But yeah, I wanted a really strong contrast on the tag, so I used black, but you can use like darker colors, or you can use white. White, you might have to add a couple layers if you are going on quite dark backgrounds. But yeah, if you want to have like that kind of contrast, but more of like a brighter contrast, you can use white. I like to use black a lot of the time, especially when the backgrounds are so colorful and just full of all sorts of different colors. Black is perfect. It helps ground everything. It really pops, and I think it looks quite nice. And yeah, so you can also see as well the way I pair different like stencil images. Sometimes I pair stencil images with the stamped images. When I was doing the stamps, I would just take the makeup sponge, just kind of fill it with quite a bit of black paint, then kind of sponge onto the stamp and then stamp onto the tag. That's how I was doing that. Sometimes I'll just like get my palette, I'll just kind of scrape like a layer of black paint onto the palette and then kind of use that as an ink pad, but this time I just like sponge the paint on. And you can see I kind of paired things slightly differently. Yeah, I would sometimes, especially when I was stenciling over bits, I would try to not cover up like the really interesting parts of the background so that you can still see it. So especially the tags that were quite kind of plain looking, they got quite a bit of stenciling on them. But yeah, you can see like all the different ways that I paired things up. And yeah, you can have a lot of fun with this, and you don't have to just only stick to stenciling if you're like decorating your tags. The reason I'm keeping these tags 2D and flat is because they have to go into packaging, and I don't want to bulk up my packaging because I put these in all sorts of orders, whether it's a canvas, a card, a matte frame piece. So I wanted to be able to fit in there. But say if you're making gift tags or something, and you want to go all out, you can use embellishments. You can use chipboard, like paper flowers. You can make your own embellishments to go on there. You can like really go all out with your embellishing. Yeah, you don't have to stay 2D at all. Just I was staying 2D because I needed it to be flat. But you can go 3D if you want. That's actually also these techniques I'm using. I do use to make like my deco art tags. I'll try to remember to link those as well. And I'll also link my DIY board where I put a whole bunch of like kind of DIY projects, and you can see, I'm sure I have some older videos with like how I've made my deco tags. Just warning, they are old videos, so the quality isn't great, but you can at least see like how I've done it and like how I've like slightly changed the way I do things now. And yeah, you can go really nice in 3D with them. I like to use chipboard and like wooden embellishments a lot. You can add ribbon. You can add all sorts of things. I'm just staying flat because I need it to be. And so that you get like a clear stencil image, because like when I was doing the background, it didn't matter too much, but I wanted these to like be nice and clear. Just make sure to just hold your stencil onto your tag like firmly so that nothing shifts. And especially with the mask, because it's a bit tricky with the masks, because you're like kind of going over the mask, especially since they're so small, but you do want to hold them firmly so nothing slips. And especially with the mask, you want to make sure you get right up next to the mask so that the image is nice and clear. And the same with the stenciling. And sometimes I made mistakes, like at one point I did stencil a heart kind of strangely, but I just kind of moved the stencil up and just even things out and it looked okay, so you couldn't really tell. But yeah, you wanna make sure and hold it nice and firmly. And again, make sure that there's not too much paint on your sponge. Some of these sentiments I stenciled were a little bit blobby. I was able to save them later on though. But yeah, you want to make sure that you kind of stamp off some of the paint so it's not too wet, because you can always keep on adding, but it's hard to take away. So even if you you sponge off too much paint, you can always go back in and add another layer of stenciling, so it's no biggie. And I thought I would just or maybe I should touch on this a little bit later. Yeah, let's talk about the doodling first, and then I'll kind of talk to you about stencil care. So soon we'll start doodling. I use my Uniball Signal white gel pen as well as a gold and silver gel pen, just your like standard gel pens that you get like as a kid, to doodle around the images. Now like say for the mask tags, I would doodle around the masked image and I kind of doodle then on the black background, as well as I like to kind of add outlines to the tags and like outline the punch hole. I did the same thing with the stenciled images. I didn't doodle on the background though, I only doodled on the mask backgrounds, but the stencils, because you already had that really busy background, I didn't add any doodling. I just added the outline to the image and the tag itself. And then the ones where it's just a background, again, I only just added the outline to the tag. and the punch hole, and that was it. And some I would add like a couple, like some kind of doodly, like scratchy bits or like dots or scallops to like the edge of the tag, or like on the black mask backgrounds. Yeah, you can, I have a bunch of gel pens, so I could have actually like used the colorful metallic gel pens, because I was using the metallic gold and silver because those would stand out better instead of the glittery gel pens. So I could have used all the different colors, but I didn't want to add more color. I didn't want to take away from the background. This was just so that the images would stand out even more and just add a little bit more interest to the tags. So I didn't bother to do that. I just used the gold and silver. I also made sure to sign the tags as well. And on the colorful backgrounds, I used a Unipin fine line, I think size 0.5, but you'll have to check that in the material list. And I used that's permanent, so that'll be okay, though actually the gel pens aren't permanent, but hopefully the tags won't get wet. They'll be safe in the packaging anyway. But yeah, I made sure to sign all the tags, and I didn't do anything to the tag backgrounds. You'll actually see those at the end of the video, because I did forget to show throughout the video at some point. So you'll see those at the end, and you'll see that the painted backgrounds actually look really messy, like in big, but once you cut them down, it's totally fine. But yeah, I didn't add anything to the back. And what I like to do is, when I'm sending the tag, instead of writing directly on the tag, I write on a post-it note and stick it on the tag so that the receiver can use the tag in whatever they want, whether they want to put it on a gift or something. Yeah, they can totally do that. So I like to leave the back of the tag nice and blank, only with a little bit of color, just so it looks a little bit more interesting. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do with the tags. To finish them off, again, you can add all sorts. And once I did all the doodling, I went in and added yarn. You'll see at the end of the video, I used white, a very light pink, and a yellow yarn. And I just put them on whatever it coordinated with. And yeah, I just added some yarn because I like to add yarn or twine or something to my tags so they don't look too empty. I don't like to have a tag without any string or anything from it. So yeah, I added all of that, and that was the tags finished. I really love how they turned out. Actually, this was really fun. It took over 2 days. I think it's because I was just making 60 tags. If you were making a smaller amount, it won't take that long. But yeah, this was really fun to do. I would definitely recommend this for just some really nice messy play around, practice some backgrounds, and then you can get some tags or bookmarks or something out of them. And if you want to protect your tags further, you can definitely laminate them. I tend to laminate my bookmarks just because I know bookmarks will go through quite a lot of use, but I don't laminate tags. But yeah, you can totally do that. Another thing you can also use is stickers. I have done tags before where I've added my own stickers to them. And then just kind of outline the stickers so it looks like they belong. So you can also do that. So while you're watching me doodle, I wanted to kind of talk about stencil care. Now, I don't look after my stencils very well at all. But the plastic ones, so the ones made out of card and stuff, I will just basically use them until I can't use them anymore, and I'll just recycle them. But I don't tend to wash my stencils, unless I use something non-permanent on them. So if I use one of my sprays, that's made from food coloring, so it's not permanent. So I will wash, well, I'll probably just wipe off the stencil really. But if I'm using acrylic, I'll just stencil and leave it there. I'm not too bothered about having paint on my stencils already. What I would say though is, if you realize that the paint on your stencil is starting to affect your stenciled images, then it's time for a wash. So the sentiment stencil, I do give a wash every now and again, just in case the letters start to get kind of murky and kind of messed up. And what I would recommend is, so if you like to wash your stencils every time you use them, but you're doing quite a bit of stenciling, you keep on switching between stencils, you can have a tub of water. So once you're finished with all your stenciling, you could just pop your stencils in a tub of water, leave them to sit a little bit. Once you finish with your arting and creating, then you can just kind of wipe them off, with the paint, especially if it's like an acetate stencil and it's like smooth and slippery, the paint should slough off quite easily, because like I wiped off my masks. I like to keep my mask clean. I'm not too bothered about my stencils, but my mask I like to keep clean, so I did wipe those off, and all I had to do was just spray some water on it, and like the acrylic hadn't really stuck to the mask very like firmly, even though it had dried, and I just wiped it off. So I can just do that with my stencils whenever I need to wash them. Put them in a tub of water, get most of the paint off, and then you can give them another like extra wash in the sink, but I recommend getting most of the paint off so that doesn't go down your drain. Or you can just be a very good stencil owner and just clean everything as you use it, but I don't. So whenever you need to give your stencils a big clean, that's what I would recommend to do. And I just use water. I don't even use soap, I just use water. Yeah, just water and a cloth or like a paper towel or something, and that'll work quite nicely. Oh, and another thing, my foam stamps. I don't clean my foam stamps either, because I only use them with acrylics. There's no need for me to do so because the acrylics will dry permanently. But what I do, and you'll probably saw me do this when I was using them, whenever I stamp it, I'll just grab my scrap piece of paper and just keep on stamping until I don't get any more stamped images. And that'll clean the stamp off more than enough. With the rubber stamp I was using, that kind of cube stamp, I'll actually clean those stamps a little bit more because that was rubber. I don't tend to like to use my rubber stamps with acrylic, but sometimes I do. I don't use my clear stamps with acrylic at all. I only use that with ink pads. So it's only rubber stamps I might use with acrylics, but I tend to only really use foam stamps because I'm not too precious about them, especially since I made them myself. I still have the die, so I can always like replace them once I've used it up. But it does take a little while to actually use up your foam stamps, to be honest. And yeah, I think that's it. I did mention that I washed my brayer, I'm sure. It took quite a bit of scrubbing. I had to use soap and water for that, a lot of scrubbing, and I got most of it off. I actually at one point had to scrape at the paint with like a palette knife. Yeah, but I was trying to be gentle because I didn't want to ding my brayer. I don't know if you can do that with a palette knife, but I was trying to be gentle as possible. But yeah, I think that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm sorry it's so long and so fast. It was a lot of footage. I was really surprised when I went to edit it. I was like, oh my gosh, 6 hours. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, like which tag design is your favorite. If you would like me to make more videos like this where I make like backgrounds in different ways, let me know in the comments below. I'll gladly do so. Whenever I need to make anything like this again, I'll film it for you guys. And yeah, so if you did like join in and create along with this video, since it's quite long, please do. If you want to share it, you can share my Facebook group, or you can tag me on Instagram or Facebook. I would love to see what you create. All my social links are down below, so you can definitely check those out. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please do give me a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already, and please do click the notification bell so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. I upload videos every Friday around 12 p.m. So yeah, that'll keep you notified if you keep on missing my videos. And yeah, I think that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you guys next week, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye!